The New York Mets have made their first trade at the deadline. They're picking up left-handed reliever Gregory Soto.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Well, the Mets have made a trade. They have picked up one of the relievers they were said to be after. It's been reported that the Mets are looking to pick up two relievers at this deadline, a left-handed reliever and maybe more of a setup man for a right-handed reliever. They got their lefty specialist in Gregory Soto from the Baltimore Orioles. Now, Gregory Soto might be familiar because he did spend a little bit of time in the Phillies bullpen. What was it, 23 and 24, and he got traded in the middle of last season to the Orioles. With the Phillies last year, pitched to a 4.08 ERA, got traded over to the Orioles, pitched to a 5.09 ERA. This year, a 3.96 ERA, career 4.24. Who is Gregory Soto? Well, he spent his early days with the Detroit Tigers, and that's why when the Phillies picked him up, I had said back then that it was an overpay or more at the time, that Gregory Soto was not what he was being sold as, because at the time he was being sold as a two-time All-Star, a two-time All-Star closer. Gregory Soto was, I don't know if I'd say miscast in that role, but he was the best on a bad Tigers team. That's why he has a couple of All-Star appearances. With that said, putting it all in proper context, this is a left-handed reliever that throws 97-mile-per-hour sinkers and keeps the ball in the yard. He does walk a lot of batters. That's the one downside. His walk rate is typically over 10%. This year, it's at 11.3%. So the walks can be an issue, but he's going to strike out a fair amount of batters this year, 27.5% batters he's faced, he's struck out. He has a nasty slider that comes in about 10 miles per hour, slower than that sinker, that gets a ton of whiff. This year, whiff rate of 47%. So you got a guy with really good stuff who can be a little bit inconsistent. The walks can end up leading to some really bad innings, but then in between, he'll get a lockdown reliever. It's not a bad first addition to this bullpen, especially when we look at the numbers against left-handers. Left-handers are hitting 138 against him with a 547 OPS. So if you look at this Mets bullpen and where they're at now, they plug in Gregory Soto. You have one of, if not the best closer in baseball right now with Edwin Diaz. You have Brooks Raley, who very well could be your eighth inning guy. He has looked outstanding since coming off the IL. He certainly figures to be one of the setup men that can hand the ball off to Edwin Diaz, that can get some of those big outs late in games. Now I look at Gregory Soto, and I think he's the guy you drop into the game in the fifth inning of a playoff game where you're not quite ready to use Brooks Raley, but you're clinging to a small lead, or you're trying to avoid a game getting away from you, and here's Bryce Harper. And so you're going to pull Gregory Soto out of the bullpen and say, all right, you try to hit 97-mile-per-hour sinkers and on your hands and hit those out. And that's what you're going to do. And I think for that specific role for this Mets bullpen, this is a really good addition by David Stearns. I don't think that this is as good as the Mets could have done. I look at the Twins and I see Daley Colomb. I cannot pronounce his name for the life of me, but the veteran left-handed reliever that drops in the knuckle curves and has just consistently pitched to super low ERAs, and this year's ERA is under 1. Like, that was kind of the top end of what you might have hoped for. Maybe that's off the table. Maybe it's not. Maybe the price of that was just so much more than the price of this. And the Mets also maybe wanted to jump the market and make sure that they weren't left without anything. This is still a market that's rich with relievers, but a lot of really good relievers that are going to take a lot to get. And if you're maybe still in the room for a Bednar, in the room for a Duran or a Clase A, we don't know if the Mets are going to shop in those waters. But if you are, maybe it's good to make sure you grab a Gregory Soto now when the price is one that you're okay with. And so you trade a couple of pitching prospects, which is where the Mets have the most depth in their system, and you get a deal done for a rental left-handed reliever that throws really hard, that fills an immediate need for you, and you get to plug him in early too. You get a little extra week before the deadline to have Gregory Soto be a big part of this bullpen and to see how that solidifies things further. I think right now with Soto and Brooks Raley, you can check the box for left-handed relievers in this bullpen. You have a guy that's more the lefty specialist in Soto, and then you have a guy in Brooks Raley that can pitch and leverage. And both of these guys can pitch and leverage. Soto's been pitching leverage for most of his career, which is still good that he has that in his back pocket. But to me, again, I look at Brooks Raley as the guy that you want to have pitching in the 8th inning. I look at Gregory Soto as the guy that you want to face, that big lefty with 2 outs and the bases loaded, come out of the bullpen and go get a strikeout. I mean that's what I see with Gregory Soto. It's a good first edition. I want to tell you guys a little bit about the prospects. So we'll get into that in just a minute here. 2 pitching prospects, one of them a 20-year-old from Port St. Lucie who's been outstanding this season in low A. So that one is going to hurt a little bit more in the long run. And then you have a 26-year-old reliever. And typically, while you could see a reliever like Cameron Foster, we'll talk about in a minute, come up to the big leagues and have some success, you're also always comfortable trading relievers. So I want to talk about the package here. We'll get to that in just a minute. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. With Game Time, you can make sure that you get the lowest price possible for your tickets. And the best part, the closer it gets to first pitch, the lower your tickets are going to be. I don't buy my tickets to games until I'm about to walk into the ballpark. Then I use Game Time. Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game like Mets vs. Giants over the weekend. Game Time has last-minute tickets and zone deals for big savings. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDON MLB for $20 off. Just create your account and redeem that code LOCKEDONMLB. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. If you're watching on YouTube today, I really appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. So let's talk about the prospects the Mets give up in this deal. The big piece is Wellington Aracena. And it hurts to trade a pitching prospect that has this much promise. He's 20 years old. He's pitched to a 2.38 ERA in St. Lucie this year. 64 1/3 innings pitched. I believe 84 strikeouts. Got electric stuff. The thing is, you are more willing to give up on the 20-year-old who's got a lot of promise than you'd want to give up on the guy that is having success in AA. And ultimately, when you're talking about a 20-year-old pitching prospect, these are guys that you haven't poured as much development in. So now they become the Orioles project, and we'll see what they can do with Wellington Aracena. And who knows, maybe it turns into a great pitcher and you regret this deal because he ends up being something one day. But he also could be nothing. He could end up being a reliever. It's so early on in his development that a lot of times you make a trade like this, there's enough separation before Wellington Aracena comes up to the big leagues that you don't feel that immediate burn that it's something that you made a mistake on. Now, the other side of the trade is a right-handed pitching prospect, Cameron Foster, 26-year-old reliever who had an unbelievable run through Binghamton this year, a 1.01 ERA in 26 and 2/3 innings pitched. Got up to Syracuse, helped them out a little bit, and gave up a bunch of runs. Gave up 7 runs in a couple appearances, then I believe ended up right back at Binghamton. I think it might have just been a matter of trying to get some arms there because so many of the Syracuse arms were helping the big league club. So you look at this trade, and you're giving up a guy that you drafted in the 14th round in 2022. So from that perspective, the fact that you developed Cameron Foster to the point that he got you anything in a trade from a 14th round pick, that's a developmental win for the New York Mets. He is not the type of prospect that you're going to lose sleep over when it's a reliever. Again, good numbers this year, though. 39 strikeouts and 30 1/3 innings pitched, 8 walks. He's done a nice job. He's only given up 1 home run this season. That's why the ERA was so low. Again, 1.01 ERA. Yeah, these are guys that are performing really well, but this is the strength of the Mets farm system. And you can look at this trade and think, okay, well, it's a rental reliever. There's a good chance that you're going to lose just because even if Cameron Foster becomes a guy that pitches to a 3.8 ERA for 4 seasons out of the Orioles bullpen, they're going to be getting a lot more innings, a lot more value than what you're going to get from Gregory Soto. But it's about the timing of the deal and what it means for your club right now. For the New York Mets, who need to get 2 arms, this is a left-hand reliever that throws the ball really hard, that fills an immediate need for you. And if you are in, game 3 of the NLDS against the Phillies, and there's runners at second and third, and you pull whoever it is, Clay Holmes in the 5th inning because Bryce Harper's coming up, and Gregory Soto comes out of the bullpen and strikes out Bryce Harper, then to be quite frank, I don't care about the futures of Wellington Aracena at that time or Cameron Foster, because you're getting the guy that can get the big out when you need it. And so you got to make these trades. And sometimes a trade like this, in the long run, you might go back on it and say, man, can you believe that here is Wellington Aracena in 2029 pitching in the All-Star game, and he was a Mets farmhand, and what did you give him up for 2 months of Gregory Soto? Yeah, eventually it can hurt like that. But right now you're talking about trying to bolster a team that has World Series aspirations, and I don't think anyone's losing sleep about giving up these pitching prospects. And again, this is where the Mets can shop. And I talked about it on my trade deadline prep shows. I said, the Mets, I did an episode, and I think I mentioned Wellington Aracena. I did not mention Cameron Foster. So if you go back to that episode, I did break down Aracena as one of the arms, but I ran off a list of, I think it was about 13 arms, and that wasn't even including the top 3 pitching prospects in the system: Jonah Tong, Jonah Tong, Nolan McLean, and Brandon Sproat. Carson Bench, one of the top position player prospects that the Mets have. And I think ultimately, if you look at this deadline and what the Mets would like to accomplish, if they can bolster their roster, where on August 1st, they feel like their bullpen is stable and in good shape, maybe they've added some bat that shakes up their roster mix a little bit, whether that is a Luis Robert in center field, whether that's a Willie Castro as a utility infielder. We don't know exactly where they're going to be shopping, if they're going to be shopping for a bat, and we still don't know about the starting rotation. But the big thing they have to do is address this bullpen, and if that is solidified and you feel good on August 1st about the Mets roster, I think if they're able to get to that point and they still have Carson Bench, Jet Williams, Nolan McLean, Jonah Tong, and Brandon Sproat in this farm system, and they have not traded any of those 5 guys, their top 5 prospects. And I think sometimes you'll have a system where you can get to a top 5, but it'll change every year, and it'll be different names. I think right now that top 5, that top tier of this Mets farm system is pretty well established. And I think if you can avoid trading from that grouping, and also if you can hang on to a Ryan Clifford, a Jacob Reimer, some of these other bats the Mets have that are, if not on some top 100 lists, on the fringes of top 100 lists, if you can hang on to those types of guys as well, and you just trade from this glut of pitching prospects, knowing that, you just turned a 14th round pick in Cameron Foster in 3 years into a movable piece. Well, you just drafted another arm in the 14th round, probably. I'd have to go back and look at the draft class. But you definitely drafted a bunch of guys after the 10th round that were arms that you see something in that you can develop, and they can either be the next Cameron Foster that helps your bullpen in 2 years, or they can be the guy that in 2 years gets traded for the Gregory Soto of that deadline in 2028. So these are the types of trades that you want to make. You get the job done with a couple of pitching prospects that ultimately are not your absolute top tier. When you look at the pitching prospects in this system, I already mentioned the top 3. Beyond that, Jack Weninger is pitching really well in Double-A. I think that's a tougher arm to give up than Wellington Aracena, just because he's closer to the big leagues, having that success. You have Jonathan Santucci, who is up in Double-A, your second-round pick last year. I think he's another guy that you'd prefer to hang on to. But again, these are also movable pieces if you're going to shoot for the reliever that is a tier above a Gregory Soto. The Mets have the capital in their farm system with all of these arms to make these moves without touching those top 5 prospects, and really without touching their MLB roster. I think the biggest thing to watch for over this next week, as the Mets will remain in every single room, they're going to be hearing what's out there on the market, who's getting traded. They're going to try to get in on certain players that make sense. They'll get in the room for a Jaron Duran or one of these guys that's a little bit of a more high-end player to pick up, or Eugenio Suarez. Well, they decide that the price that's being asked for is worth it when apparently the Red Sox turned down Dylan Cease for Jarren Duran. That was one of the reports that came out, that the Padres had offered Ethan Salas, who's their number 2 prospect, their top catching prospect, Dylan Cease, and then another pitching prospect, and that was turned down by the Red Sox. If the price is that crazy, well, then you're not going to actually pull off those trades. But the Mets are going to be in all these rooms. They have the capital to do any trade that they want to, but I don't necessarily expect them to get some type of a blockbuster start. That the best that's going to happen at this deadline is maybe they pull off a Bednar trade and they get still a top-end reliever. And if you get Bednar, if that's the Mets deadline, and they get David Bednar, who has like 20-plus consecutive scoreless appearances under his belt, is pitching as well as he ever has in his career. He's had a really good career with the Pirates. If you get that guy to slide into the 8th inning, you have Brooks Raley, you have Reed Garrett, you have Jose Budo, you have all these different guys, Huascar Brazaban, and Gregory Soto's in there too. All of a sudden, that bullpen gets to the point where I think it's really lights out to have a bullpen that can be very dangerous in a playoff setting. The rotation, we'll see. There's a lot of question marks there, and I don't know what the Mets are going to add to it. But if they can make one more big move, I think this bullpen's in good shape, and that's the biggest thing they have to do at this deadline. So hats off to the Mets for jumping the market on Gregory Soto, getting the job done. Is he my most ideal left-handed reliever that was on the market that I absolutely wanted them to get? Not necessarily. Am I a little bit concerned about the elevated walk rates and what that's going to look like, and if there can be some frustrating innings and a guy that can be a little bit streaky on the mound? Yeah, all those things do concern me. But when you look at the elite splits and the fact that he is really tough on left-handers, you don't get a lot of lefties that are able to have success in the big leagues as a reliever, and not a lot that are throwing 97. So when you get that type of a profile and you can grab it for a couple pitching prospects that obviously are talented enough that the Orioles were excited to pull the trigger on a deal now, but ultimately guys that might not have been among your top 10 pitching prospects, certainly not for Cameron Foster, and I would really have to think about it for Wellington Aracena. It's a no-brainer trade. So good move by the Mets. I will be going live anytime they make another trade just like this. So I hope you all liked the immediacy of this podcast. I appreciate all of you who tuned into the live stream, for all of you who will watch the playback. Same thing as always, barring any other future moves here, I'll be back for another edition of the show tomorrow morning, breaking down whatever happens in the Mets game against the Giants later on tonight. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, check out Locked On Sports Today. Streams 24/7 on YouTube. Keep up today on all the latest of the world of sports with local experts for each team, league-wide experts for each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 right now over on YouTube.